Rate the landlord. Anonymously share information with tenants like you. I've had to deal with difficult landlords a handful of times, and I'd say the common thread is that they expect you, the tenant, to not understand your rights and the laws that enforce those rights. This is especially the case in low-quality housing units near universities, where students generally don't live in a single place for more than a year or two. For example, one time a landlord didn't return the security deposit. I called him, messaged him, left notes in his mailbox. No reply. 1 month, 2 months went by. So I looked up the relevant legal code, found the part that said, landlords have 30 days to return the security deposit with any deductions listed. Failure to do so results in the landlord owing the tenant double the original amount with no deductions. I printed that out, highlighted the relevant section, and mailed him a letter saying that he can return the original deposit amount to me immediately, or I will file at the local court, and he'll owe me double. I got a check in the mail 2 days later.
This is one of the reasons I became a landlord in the first place. One of my tenants recently experienced a terrible water damage issue that caused both bathrooms in their unit to be unavailable while repairs occur. They were shocked when I told them I would cover the cost of their relocation expenses while the repairs occurred. I got really lucky when the company I work for went public. Going from being nearly homeless as a child to being a well-compensated and now wealthy engineer really was motivating to give something back. Buying a few properties, renting them to lower-income people, and really working with them when they're struggling might not be efficient, scalable with my little 7-figure windfall, but being able to make and see a direct impact really makes me quite happy.
You're extracting revenue from the poor. Please don't aggrandize your ownership of homes as an altruistic gesture.
That they expect you, the tenant, to not understand your rights and the laws that enforce those rights. It could well be that they themselves don't understand your rights. Sure, in the case of the security deposit, they should be smart enough to know what this is. But many landlords are just normal people with other jobs, where being a landlord is not a job to them, but an opportunity to earn money by renting. While one should be able to expect them to know the relevant laws, I bet that most of them don't care to bother because of the time and effort it takes.
But many landlords are just normal people with other jobs, where being a landlord is not a job to them, but an opportunity to earn money by renting. That's no excuse for not returning a tenant's security deposit, though.
The regulations on security deposit in Massachusetts has led me to not use security deposits. I also don't use a lease. A tenant can come and go from month to month. I only require first and last month's rent.
First and last month's rent. Just to be sure, is this a smart name for what others call a deposit?
You'd hope that business owners would care about running ethical businesses and meeting their clients' needs, instead of holding them in outright contempt and disdain.
If Glassdoor can't protect the anonymity of its reviewers, this can't either. There will be legal allegations of libel that will lead to one's identity being revealed by court order or otherwise. I also find these sites largely useless for research, as only the people with extremely strong sentiment would go out of their way to add a review, meaning almost any management company with a large number of tenants will end up with bad ratings, as some portion of those tenants almost definitely will have a negative perception of the management, and that portion will be overrepresented in the tally.
I get where you're coming from, but no system is perfect, right? While anonymity concerns and skewed reviews might be valid points, that doesn't mean we should dismiss the whole idea. Instead, we could work on refining the system to minimize these issues, like implementing measures to protect anonymity and encouraging a more balanced representation of reviews. Remember, sites like this are just one piece of the puzzle when making decisions. Sure, they might not be perfect, but they can provide useful insights when taken with a grain of salt. And who knows? Maybe this website could inspire a new wave of accountability and transparency in the landlord-tenant relationship, which seems like a win to me.
Yet, Glassdoor is still thriving. This is just a step forward for transparency.
But the question remains, is it useful?
Is it required to record personally identifying data? You could even have the web browser do like a mini Tor protocol, where your IP is tunneled through others currently logged in.
It's their own fault if they say something in a review that they can't prove.
That's not the direction that burden of proof goes.
I've written a few landlord reviews, and none were even pseudonymous. my identity was exposed in each case. Of course, down thread, they are totally correct. If you give enough information about particular disputes you had, you automatically reveal your identity anyway. The sites where I left reviews were carefully patrolled by the business itself, so I often received responses or feedback on what I'd said. At some point I defended their practices around maintenance, and they thanked me. At another point, I was disgruntled, and they made a public reply offering to meet with me, which was disingenuous since they had no such intent. The reality of the landlord-tenant relationship in these United States, especially at a low income level and a frighteningly low vacancy rate, is that the tenant is absolutely powerless and defenseless in any dispute. Evictions are quick, easy, and decisive. There is no lawyer who will defend tenants against landlords because there's no money in that. You can try to play the landlord-tenants rights game, but once you stick your neck out as a nuisance, all they have to do is decide not to renew your lease, and you're out in the cold. There's no recourse for that.
It is frightening how little tenants are protected from being kicked out by the landlord in the US. Are there major differences between the states? In contrast to that, I believe tenants are too well protected in Europe, or at least Germany, from sitting out in the cold. For example, if a tenant has not paid rent in months and is not planning on doing so, it still is legally difficult to put them on the street. I think the term for that is squatter. Friend of mine had damage on his property exceeding 10,000 euros until he could regain control over his apartment flat.
I don't think this will work, for the many reasons other comments have laid out, but I hope something can be done. The power imbalance between landlords and tenants is outrageous. Tenant legal rights are rarely respected. Agencies basically ignore the needs of tenants. I cannot think of another product category where the buyer is treated so poorly, and for a service costing 1,000 seconds of dollars. Clearly, the current incentive structures are not working.
I think this varies dramatically state to state. Perversely, my experience has been that strong tenants' rights are highly correlated with high hurdles to renting.
How so? Also, which states have strong tenants' rights?
Send people a postcard to verify their address. If they lived there recently, they probably set up forwarding, so USPS would forward the postcard to their new address, and they could still verify themselves as being a tenant during the past 12 months. I agree with the concept, and we definitely need this. The issue, generally speaking, is that there isn't much of a business model.
Why does there need to be a business model? Can't people contribute to society for its own sake? Comments like this are implicitly hostile to that idea, and that is the issue with our society, generally speaking.
Aside from server costs and dev costs, which do have to be paid by someone, a postcard-based authentication method means the platform would be spending about 0.48 per review. That has to be paid for somehow.
I agree with the concept, and we definitely need this. The issue, generally speaking, is that there isn't much of a business model. This is similar to one of the anti-businesses I have long considered, except I would like to perform actual, invasive background checks on landlords. A couple others. A service for employees to drug test their employers. A neighborhood watch app to report suspected police activity in your community.
I would like to perform actual, invasive background checks on landlords. Why would a landlord sign up for that, though? A rating system or history is one thing, but what additional value would a tenant have in a landlord who passes these invasive background checks? A service for employees to drug test their employers. What's the goal there? What are the incentives? Why would employers sign up to it? And why would employees especially care? The system doesn't have your real or perceived injustices, because there are a few evil fat cat employers and landlords who just need to be shown the error of their ways and or publicly shamed about their hypocrisy and driven off. It just happens as a consequence of the incentives involved. A neighborhood watch app to report suspected police activity in your community. What would be the goal? Every neighborhood group I've seen significantly features discussions about crimes and police activity. As far as I can see, the most use people get out of them is being alerted to speed traps.
The goal is to satisfy someone's anti-authority fetish.
Ha! I had this idea in the car the other day. Like Ray to my professor, but for landlords. The big issue I got hung up on is authenticity. How does this tool ensure that reviewers are actually tenants and not landlords trying to boost their rating?
Upload proof of address with your name on it when creating the account, like a bank statement or electricity bill. The only way for the landlord to cheat it is to set up fake accounts with companies and get statements sent to them. Probably possible, but a lot of work for one review.
Sites like these have been popping up everywhere through the years. Why not simply use Yelp or Google? What are the moderation and verification challenges? What about legal defamation issues? How would one trust each review?
I would have loved to have had something like this when I was living in New Zealand, which is notorious for slumlords and rentals, which are literal health hazards. Every time someone has proposed something like this for New Zealand on the NZ subreddit, there are questions around legality, although some of it might just be fear-mongering. How does it work out in the US? Are you planning to take info for properties worldwide?
I don't expect to agree on one notion of fairness, but I want to know how the service will behave. There are a range of good and bad actions on both sides. Services all have some implied stated actual policies and ethics, or lack thereof. How exactly are tenants treated fairly? Landlords. So far, what I see are unstated policies, opaqueness around moderation and curation, and a lack of organizational and structural reputation and accountability. We need to pay more attention to human nature and models of trust before launching and using a product. You don't pivot to find a model of ethics and trust. It should be the foundation.
Ah yes, the classic human nature argument, as if our current system of landlord-tenant relationships is the epitome of ethical behavior. At least this platform attempts to level the playing field by giving tenants a voice. Sure, it may not be perfect, but let's not pretend that the status quo is a shining example of trust and ethics. Instead of criticizing the very idea, maybe we could focus on improving the platform and establishing those foundational values you speak of. Or, we could just continue to trust our benevolent landlord overlords without question.